Witch Trials Weekly, Video 16, April the 29th to May the 5th, 1692. Uneasiness and Laughter.
Hello, and welcome to Video 16 of Witch Trials Weekly. On April 29th, down in Boston, Cotton Mather sat and reflected in prayer about the happenings in Salem. Now, Cotton Mather didn't believe that spectral evidence alone was enough to convict a person because demons could go around and impersonate even innocent people. He also believed that the girls would recover if moved to a quiet environment and made to pray and fast. He even offered his home and care to 6 of the afflicted girls at the onset of the hysteria. Their families refused. Now, what do you think would have happened if those girls had gone to Cotton Mather? Would they have gotten better? Would this whole thing have been avoided? Also, what would have happened if the judges remembered what the religious view on spectral evidence was? Supposedly, Bridget Bishop's specter appeared to Susannah Sheldon and told her that she had murdered several women, including John Trask's wife. Little did Susannah know that the Trasks actually suspected Sarah Bishop, not Bridget Bishop, to be the murderer. Elizabeth Hubbard was bothered by the specter of Rebecca Jacobs, daughter-in-law to George Jacobs Sr., who had supposedly been mentally unbalanced for the past 12 years. On April 30th, arrest warrants were issued for Reverend George Burroughs, Lydia Dustin, Susannah Martin, Sarah Morrill, Dorcas Hoar, and Philip English. Philip English fled to the home of his business associate George Hollard in Boston. On May 2nd, there was another round of examinations. Notes from Sarah Morrill's examinations no longer exist, but she was held for further questioning. Lydia Dustin was an 80-year-old widow who was held for causing harm to the newly afflicted Mary Marshall, a widow from Reading. Dorcas Hoar was a widow and supposedly well-known fortune teller. She was from a rowdy family who would supposedly steal from their neighbors. After she had been fined for stealing from Reverend John Hale, she and some of her family members decided that they would club his cow to death and then throw rocks at his house to scare his family members when he wasn't home. Some people wondered if she was responsible for the death of her late husband, and Elizabeth Hubbard said she had choked him to death. The magistrates were so compelled by the girls' afflictions that they overlooked the inaccurate details of their visions. One of the girls said that she saw the devil whispering in Dorcas Hoar's ear, to which Dorcas responded, "Oh, you are all liars. God will stop the mouth of liars. There is someone will rub your ears shortly," she told the girls, threatening that God would punish them for their lies, at which point some of the girls' ears began to burn. Now, for the first time, the magistrates decided that they would try the touch test. Now, this was a folk magic, sort of counter-magic thing, where it was believed that the sight of a witch on a certain person could cause afflictions, whereas the witch's touch would cause her harmful magic to flow back into her body, thus relieving the afflicted. Perhaps the magistrates forgot that this was a folk test and thus had no religious or legal standing. Perhaps they were so desperate to relieve the girls that they didn't care. None of the girls were able to approach Dorcas so she could try this test. They all seemed to be repelled by her by some invisible force. And so Dorcas Hoar was held for trial. Susannah Martin was the last person examined on May 2nd. She was a sharp-tongued 70-year-old widow who had been suspected of being a witch for the past 30 years. Now, when Susannah Martin entered the court, Mercy Lewis pointed at her wordlessly, and Ann Putnam Jr. threw a glove at her, at which point Susannah Martin broke out laughing. Perhaps it was nerves, perhaps she really just thought what the girls was doing was ridiculous. But when the magistrates asked her why she was laughing, she responded, "Well, I may laugh at such a folly." As she continued to laugh, some of the onlookers thought her heartless and thought that she had no compassion for the afflicted girls. Susannah suggested that the girls themselves were witches, but the magistrates paid more attention to the anguish that the afflicted girls were suffering instead of to Susannah's biblical challenge, in which she stated, "He that appeared in the shape of Samuel, a glorified saint, may appear in anyone's shape." They tried to have Susannah perform the touch test as well, and when none of the girls could approach her, she offered to go to them. The magistrates declined that offer and stated that the whole congregation thought that she was a witch. "Let them think what they will," she said, and was held for trial. All of the 4 women examined on May 2nd were held in Salem jail overnight before being transferred to Boston. Reverend George Burroughs was being brought to Salem all the way from Wells, Maine. Now, supposedly, according to folk history, there was a crazy torrential storm during his transport, but George Burroughs didn't use this as an opportunity to escape. And where some may have seen this as a sign of good faith, others simply saw it as the devil's failure in freeing George. His specter appeared to Elizabeth Hubbard the next night, stating that he was more than a wizard. He was a conjurer. The specter of Reverend George Burroughs also appeared to Ann Putnam Jr., along with the ghosts of his first 2 wives, who were both claiming that he had murdered them. His first wife said she had been stabbed under the arm. The second said that George and his third wife had killed her on a boat. The ghosts of Reverend Deodat Lawson's first wife and a Goody Fuller also appeared to Anne, claiming that George had killed them. On May 4th, the real George Burroughs arrived in Salem. He was kept separately, however, from the rest of the prisoners in Thomas Beadle's tavern. Perhaps he was kept separately because the magistrates didn't want him to be affected by the other prisoners. Or perhaps they really believed the girls and thought that he was this powerful conjurer and were afraid of all of the terrible things he might do.
This video was produced with special permission from the author, Marilyn K. Roach, and publisher, Cooper Square Press. The Salem Witch Trials, a day-by-day chronicle of a community under siege, covers the years 1692 to 1697 in detail. It also touches briefly on important and relevant events before and after this time. We are proud to carry all of Miss Roach's books and publications in our museum store. To get a copy for your personal research and enjoyment, please visit www.salemwitchmuseum.com.